Hello everyone! Welcome to A Good Night for a Murder, a Victorian true crime podcast. My name is Kim, and first and foremost, Happy New Year. I hope you enjoyed your time with your friends and family and are feeling refreshed and ready to take on new things. Apparently, what we're taking on over here on A Good Night for a Murder is what has become Axe Murder January. For no reason other than there are a lot of historic axe murder cases. We're going to start tonight with the case of Clementine Barnabet, who was accused of spearheading an axe murder voodoo cult in the early 1900s. The bonus content covers more axe murders and the theories that perhaps they are all actually linked, and even the Goodnight Snack episode coming out later this month is on an axe murder case. Clearly, we have a lot to cover, so let's get started. But first, a Victorian Society tip. Tonight's tip is about Victorian home security, very relevant to the cases we'll discuss tonight, where everyone's worst fear of a home intruder with murderous intentions comes true. Today, it's almost the bare minimum to have a doorbell camera on your front door. But what did Victorians do? First, Victorian homes were built with security in mind. Those high walls or hedges and wrought iron fences with spikes on top were meant to keep people out. Also, between the exterior wall and the house, there was often a deep drop down to a basement where servants would enter and exit. This worked sort of like a moat. And while it didn't run all the way around the house, it did make things a little more difficult for would-be breaking and enterers. The Victorians were also renowned for their locking technology. Door locks featuring multiple levers that had to align with a specific pattern or complex keys that required precise turns became popular. The first burglar alarm was actually invented in 1853 by Augustus Pope. It used electromagnets to ring a bell with a hammer when a door or window was opened. These would sometimes be combined with annunciators or servant call systems to alert to different parts of the house. In 1853, Edwin Holmes acquired Pope's patent and expanded the company's offerings to include their own police force that would respond to its alarms. This was the beginning of central monitoring. Wealthy homeowners who had large estates often set man traps, which are exactly what they sound like, spring-loaded traps with iron jaws that were chained to anchored stakes around their grounds. For as many good ideas that the Victorians had, they had a lot of terrifyingly bad ones too. Anyway, that's all well and good if you're rich, but what if you were poor? Well, for one thing, the poor had very few valuables to steal, so they weren't as worried about robbers. Even if you're unconcerned about burglary, though, as listeners of true crime know, there are people with bad intentions out there. So, how do we keep them out? Well, for one thing, you could get a dog. Big dogs could be scarier, but depending on their temperament, may not rise to the occasion if confronted. Little dogs, though, were usually noisier and were thought to be lighter sleepers, so they made good alarms. This is not news to anyone who has ever owned a dog. Besides other common precautions like having a weapon or firearm handy, the other major recourse for poorer citizens so far as security was just to know your neighbors. Organized police forces, as we know them, were not a thing until well into the mid to late 1800s. At first, their jobs were mostly things like keeping an eye out for illegal gambling, catching loose livestock, lighting signal beacons, collecting taxes, and the like. If there were any crimes to solve, the community was just sort of expected to resolve it amongst themselves. For this reason, community watchfulness was a big deal. Any strangers would be noticed quickly and confronted. Town-wide nighttime curfews were common for this reason, because if we're all in bed by 11, no one was out there to get into trouble. This also made the job of night watchmen easier. Night watchmen were kind of a precursor to modern police forces. Their jobs were to roam around the streets looking for anything untoward or sometimes monitor from watchtowers. Aside from that, the advice was similar to what we say today, which is be vigilant and lock your damn doors. A Good Night for a Murder is a true crime podcast that does cover stories including death, violence, sexual assault, and other adult themes. This episode does include death and harm to children. Please take care while listening. On February 24th, 1911, the Barnabet family of Lafayette, Louisiana, awoke to the news that their neighbors, the Andrus family, had been murdered in the night. The family, 30 and 29-year-old husband and wife Alexander and Mimi Andrus, and their children, 3-year-old Joachim and 11-month-old Agnes, had been struck down in their sleep with an axe that was found on the floor of their home. A month before, in nearby Crowley, Louisiana, the Byers family had been killed in the same fashion. Father, mother, and young children all axed to death in their sleep. The murders were eerily similar to another back in 1909 out in Rayne, Louisiana, where a mother and her 3 children, ages 4 to 9, had also been killed. All families of color, all murdered in the night by axe. And now the murders had come to the Barnabets' doorstep. Some, though, thought the murders had done more than just arrive in Lafayette. They thought the Barnabets were, in fact, responsible. The Barnabet family had moved to the area in 1909 and included Raymond Barnabet, his live-in girlfriend and mother of his younger children, Dina Porter, Raymond's children, Clementine, Zephyrin, and probably 2 more children. Raymond also had an older daughter from a prior relationship, Pauline, who lived in Rayne. Aside from the alarmingly similar MO, police had not linked the murders together at the time and were still investigating suspects individually. An alleged mistress of Raymond's reported that she felt Raymond might have had something to do with the murder of the Andrus family. Police knew Raymond as a petty criminal who reportedly abused his family, and 2 days after the murder, they arrested him. However, they did not have sufficient evidence to hold him, and he was released within a week. The investigation, however, was ongoing. Raymond's daughter, 17-year-old Clementine, and son Zephyrin, of about the same age, both gave statements that he had come home boasting of the Andrus murders with bloodied clothes. They stated that they feared for their life so long as their father was free. His partner, Dina, stated that she had not seen or heard any of that, but did testify that Raymond was violent with her and the children and had even threatened to kill her. Testimonies from neighbors corroborated Dina's statements. In the meantime, on March 21st, 1911, another family was murdered. This time, it was the Casaway family. 51-year-old Alfred, 37-year-old Elizabeth, and their 3 children, Louise, age 6, Josie, age 3, and Alfred Carlisle, only 5 months old. This murder occurred in San Antonio, Texas. So Raymond was not suspected, but citizens all throughout the area are really putting pressure on police to solve any one of these murders. Throughout the entire region, whole families are getting axed to death in their own beds, and no one is helping them. So, in July of 1911, Raymond was rearrested. His case went to trial, and on October 19, 1911, Raymond Barnabet was actually convicted and sentenced to hang for the murder of the Andrus family. However, someone had smuggled a bottle of wine into Raymond, and he was completely wasted for his entire trial. It was on these grounds that his attorney was able to file for an appeal. In the meantime, though, Raymond would be behind bars, which brought comfort to the residents of Lafayette. Until it happened again. On November 26, 1911, the Randall family of Lafayette, parents Norbert and Azima and their 4 children, were murdered in the night. Norbert had been shot in the head, but the rest of the family had been bludgeoned again by axe. Being locked up, Raymond was not a suspect, but in a curious turn, his 17-year-old daughter Clementine fell under suspicion. At the time, Clementine was working as the live-in housekeeper for the Gairdry family, who lived only a few blocks away from the Randalls. The sheriff was already suspicious of the Barnabet teens due to their troublemaker reputation about town. Then, blood was found on the back gate to the Gairdry residence, and that was all the sheriff needed to bring in both Clementine and Zephyrin. Zephyrin had an alibi for the night, but Clementine did not. Upon searching her room, they found an apron, dress, and underwear with blood on it. Clementine had testified during her father's trial that it was him who had wiped the blood on her clothes. But now, investigators wondered if that was a lie, and it was actually Clementine who had been responsible for the Andrus murders as well. Ultimately, Clementine would go on to stand trial for both the Andrus and Randall family murders. During the trial, Clementine acted erratically, including rocking back and forth in her chair and laughing. Things only got stranger from there, as she claimed to be acting under orders from an offshoot of the Christ-sanctified Holy Church congregation in Lake Charles, Louisiana, called the Church of Sacrifice. She confessed to all of the murders alongside an unspecified number of accomplices, including the 1909 case in Rayne that she said she committed while visiting her sister as a test. But then, while Clementine was locked up, another 3 families were murdered. These were the Warner family, including 24-year-old Mother Marie and her 3 children, ages 9 to 5, the Wexford family, and the Broussard family, including 40-year-old Felix, his 36-year-old wife Matilda, and their 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 3. In the case of the Broussards, there was allegedly an odd message scrawled on the wall that read, "When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble." This is actually a misquoted version of Psalm 9:12 in the King James Bible, but it was signed Human 5, which the press really leaned into. In fact, the press leaned so far into these stories, they started making up their own parts. For example, the Wexford family I just mentioned may not have been real. There doesn't seem to have been any official reports made on it, and it's only mentioned in the press, and the details are pretty close to that of the Warner family. Similarly, for the message on the wall, signed the Human 5, police did wonder if that could be a gang of some sort. They also wondered if a reporter looking for a scoop could have written that themselves. Sometime later, Clementine recanted her confession, which kind of made sense to officials. They definitely didn't think she was behind all of the murders. But then, in April of 1912, Clementine confessed again, this time in lurid detail. Clementine said she had acquired a conjure bag, a voodoo or hoodoo charm meant to protect her while committing the crimes. She said their purpose was to make her invisible to authorities and that she also disguised herself as a man. She said that she and 4 accomplices drew lots as to who would test the charms. At first, she said they didn't know who the victims would be. Then later said they chose them based on families that had infants, even though a number of families did not have infants at all. Altogether, she said they were responsible for 35 murders and that she herself committed 17 with her own hands. She later upped her own count to 20. This wasn't the only part of her story that was hard to keep track of, though. Her story often contradicted itself as well as disagreed with crime scene details. For instance, she claimed to have nearly always entered through the back door. In most cases, the perpetrator entered through a window. She claimed to have shot Norbert Randall herself, but got the location of the shot wrong. When other voodoo and hoodoo practitioners were asked about the conjure bags Clementine described, they said they sounded more like what they would make to heal rheumatism or back pain. So far as the other 4 accomplices from the Church of Sacrifice, though. Clementine said they were 2 men and 2 women, but would only name the women by their first names, Mary and Irene. Her brother named 2 men he claimed he knew were with Clementine the night of the Randall murders, Edwin Charles and Gregory Porter. It sounds like there were 4 or 5 arrests based on Clementine and her brother's stories, but none ever quite fit the narrative they were pushing, and none of them were ever charged. Later that same month, Clementine was allowed to give a press conference of sorts. She smoked cigars given to her by reporters and sang hymns for them. She was also excited about having her photo appear in the newspaper. The press went absolutely wild for Clementine's confession, leaning heavily into the voodoo and hoodoo aspects of the story. A number of motives for Clementine were invented, including that Clementine was the high priestess of the Church of Sacrifice, a ritualistic human sacrifice cult. Police did question Pentecostal revival preacher Reverend King Harris, who led Christ Sanctified Holy Church, the group that allegedly inspired the Church of Sacrifice. But he said he never heard of the Church of Sacrifice and was visibly shaken at the implication that his sermons could inspire such brutal killings. Clementine's defense attorneys argued that she was clearly insane, but a team of court-appointed physicians declared Clementine was fit to stand trial. So, her trial for the murder of Azima Randall began on October 21, 1912. Her attorney said Clementine's abusive childhood caused her confessions to be unreliable. He also questioned the forensic methods used to match the blood of the Andrus family to that found on Clementine's clothes. Despite this, Clementine was convicted on October 25th and sentenced to life in Louisiana State Penitentiary. During her incarceration, she worked on the on-site sugarcane field and only tried to escape once in July of 1913. Actually, she did escape, but they caught her and brought her back. Aside from this, she was described as a model inmate. Then, about 10 years into her life sentence, Clementine was released. The explanation given by the prison was that the prison's physician, along with an inmate who studied medicine during his confinement, had performed an operation on Clementine, and now she was cured. This sounds a lot like a lobotomy, but those weren't a thing yet in 1923. So we don't really know what they did to Clementine, if anything. The modern take is that despite the court conviction, no one had actually believed her story in the first place, and they saw no reason to keep an innocent woman locked up. So they invented a reason to let her go. Either way, after her release, Clementine was never really heard from again, which does kind of support the theory that her whole story was made up. It would be interesting to know when her father died. We have no way of knowing, but I'm curious if she was honestly just afraid of him the whole time. Like to the point that she wanted to be put in prison to feel safe. What was real, though, was a string of bloody axe murders perpetrated against innocent families throughout the South. In most cases, there were other arrests made with varying degrees of certainty, and despite no evidence confirming its existence, the Church of Sacrifice was blamed for killings for years to come. There is also an interesting theory that suggests the murders between 1909 and 1912 are the early work of a serial killer. If true, that would place their body count upwards of 90 victims, including men, women, children, and even infants. That is actually what the bonus content for this episode is about. I'm interested to hear what you think of Clementine Barnabet, though. Do you think she was actually guilty of anything? Do you think her father and her brother were? And what do you make of the story of her release? If you're listening on Spotify, you can comment on the episode there, or head over to Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder. You can let me know what you think there as well. I've also posted a photo of Clementine and some of the sensationalist newspaper coverage of her case. You can also see the photos and source links for this episode on the episode blog on my website at agoodnightforamurder.com. As mentioned, the bonus content for Patreon members for this episode are more axe murder cases and the eerie similarities between them. Listen through the outro music to hear a short preview of this Patreon bonus content. To subscribe to Patreon and learn more about the podcast, you can visit agoodnightforamurder.com. Also, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube at A Good Night for a Murder. Please rate and review and share with friends. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again soon. Kim, and to accompany episode 51, Cult of the Axe Murderer, about Clementine Barnabet, I'm going to tell you about when axe murder ran rampant in America. In the early 1900s in the U.S., entire families were being slain in their beds as they slept. It's human nature to want to believe most people are good. So, pretty quickly, theories evolved that these murders were connected. We wanted to believe that this was the work of one bad apple, and all we had to do was catch him, and then we'd feel safe. And even modern researchers have found good data to support this. However, none of it has ever really managed to be proven. So, was this the work of one? Or, way worse, were there many axe murderers out there? Between 1909 and 1912, and some say clear through 1919, there was a spree of axe murders across the United States. Entire families were being struck down, sometimes at the rate of only a few weeks apart. Due to geographical and communication limits of the time period, police had a difficult time seeing the full picture of these crimes and spent a lot of effort running down leads for each individual incident. Sometimes they found good suspects. Sometimes they did not. Due to pressure to solve cases, they sometimes made convictions that made little sense and considered the case closed when it very much should have remained open. Modern researchers, though, have the luxury of being able to look back and comb through historic records and reports to gain the 30,000-foot view and uncover patterns therein. To understand why these theorists land where they do, though, we need to talk a bit about the cases. We already covered some of these in the regular episode that would eventually, correctly or incorrectly, be attributed to Clementine Barnabet. Those would be the 1909 murder of a mother and her 3 children, the murder of the Byers family, including their parents and 3 children in early 1911, a month later, the murder of the Andrus family, including the parents and 2 children, and the murder of the Randall family, including, again, the parents and this time their 4 children, also in 1911. These all occurred in Louisiana in the southeastern United States. Crimes with a similar pattern also cropped up in the Northwest, though. While some researchers have looked back even earlier and found similar crimes in this region, the 2 cases most mentioned occurred 4 and 5 months later. The first is the Hill family murder in Ardenwald, Oregon, the night of June 9, 1911. It's estimated that at about 12:45 a.m., someone entered the Hills' home with an axe they had taken off a neighbor's porch and bludgeoned 34-year-old William Hill in the head while he slept in bed. His wife, 33-year-old Ruth, was then killed in a similar manner. After that, the couple's 2 children from Ruth's previous marriage, 9-year-old Philip and 4-year-old Dorothy, were also murdered. It was evident that little Dorothy and her mother were both sexually assaulted after the killing. The killer had attempted at some point to wash the crime scene and also cover the windows. The Hills were discovered by a neighbor whose husband noticed William did not catch the streetcar for work as he did every morning. Another neighbor, Nathan Harvey, would ultimately be charged with the crime, but would go on to be acquitted in 1912. In the meantime, though, another murder would take place exactly a month later. This time, a little over a 2-hour drive north by today's standards in Rainier, Washington. The victims were 28-year-old Archie Cobble and his wife, 18-year-old Nettie. Both were murdered as they slept with the blunt side of an axe. When found, Archie's face had been covered post-killing with a cloth, and Nettie had been sexually assaulted, then staged in an explicit manner. Archie's foreman at work, George Wilson, was convicted for this crime.